Art often imitates life, and while in this modern society, art is often abstract that requires the viewer to think and create an image out of the artist. For the longest time, art was done to reflect real people with real emotions in their realest state imaginable. Francisco de Goya was a Spanish artist who was made famous from his brutal depictions of his homeland of Spain under the French rule of Joseph Bonaparte during the Peninsular War. This eventually led to the creation of Goya's most famous painting, his nameless painting, that grew to be known as Saturn Eating His Son. Void Interactive's Ready or Not is a tactical, first-person shooter released on December 13th, 2023, and revolves around the SWAT commander of D Platoon, David Judge Beaumont, as he and his team find themselves responding to situations across the city of Los Sueños, a parody of Los Angeles, California. You, the player, aka Judge, are not special. You are simply a man with a job to do. Morality is objective yet unobjective at the same time. You're a cog in the machine, justice is the law, and the police are their hand and gavel. Emotions are not important, and you do what you can do for the greater good, because this is reality. Realism is an often misunderstood genre by modern media, and especially in video games. Typically, a realistic video game is looked at by cutting-edge graphics, accurate and realistic depictions of landscapes, and its prevalence in shooters, creating and implementing controls to properly depict how armed forces engage in combat. However, often they can employ major character arcs that drive out the story narrative to become more fantasy-based. But Ready or Not does this differently because it understands that realism is more than just a form of gameplay, but a reflection of modern-day society, which is more than what Rainbow Six or Stalker can ever depict. Disclaimer. I, the presenter, have an important statement that must be made apparent right away. First off, if you see my videos of the game or know anything about Ready or Not, you'd know that it is a very bleak game that depicts subject matter that some people may find uncomfortable. So if you are sensitive to these subjects, I respect your opinion, but going forward, it is best that you click off this video. This is your only warning. Second, because this essay will cover multiple issues that affect today's society, it must be made apparent that the content presented will be done in as neutral and informative a manner as possible. Lastly, as per my previous analysis videos, I enjoy adding some humor into them, but because this essay covers heavy topics, it would be in poor taste to add jokes to it, so I, the presenter, will refrain from attempts of humor for the extent of this essay.
Hands up!
Get on the fucking ground! Drop the weapon now!
First off is to best understand how realism is understood as a literary genre. Realism was popularized in the 1800s as a way for people to tell stories where society is often depicted just the way it is, especially under a historical setting. It is the antithesis to Romanticism, which is tied to the ideal of looking at the world through an idealistic view, or rose-tinted glasses. This is not to say that realism is automatically something like a tragedy, but it isn't a comedy neither. A popular example of this comes in the form of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The story covers the tale of a young boy, Huck Finn, as he ventures down the Mississippi River with an escaped slave named Jim. The story depicts the society of the South, while Huck Finn struggles with the moral implications of society's views on slaves and his ethical relationship with Jim. While the story covers multiple events, and while Huck Finn goes under his own character arc, the story takes on a less fantasized aspects by depicting a more authentic rendition of antebellum America. This part is an important aspect, as one of the prime focuses of Huck Finn is to cover society in its zeitgeist. As time went on, realism, especially in video games, saw a niche growth in popularity over the past decade or so, especially in the realm of first-person shooters. Starting in the late 1990s, one of the first shooters to depict realism was Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, released in 1998. This game saw a far departure from id Software's Doom, Wolfenstein, and Quake's fantastical arenas by placing their perspective into a joint task force unit dismantling terrorist cells and saving hostages. The Tom Clancy name then created other games like Ghost Recon and Splinter Cell, which would later turn them into more semi-sci-fi shooters and spy thrillers. Even Rainbow Six changed drastically with the advent of Siege that saw a great departure of simulating actual situations prevalent in the world of counterterrorism to becoming a tactical hero shooter, which is a topic for a different time. From the late 2010s to the early 2020s, there saw a new advent of games that desired to encapsulate a more realistic approach on shooter games, and which each new installment drives this view in different directions. Escape from Tarkov approaches realism by depicting a survival philosophy, by throwing the player into an unforgiving environment, forcing them to adapt quickly. Insurgency Sandstorm creates a balance of the casual multiplayer experience while still revolving the game around realistic combat tactics. And lastly, war games like Rising Storm 2 Vietnam and Hell Let Loose depict grandiose and historical battles that add logistics and mass cooperation against multiple teams in order to push towards a common goal. However, all of these games have in common is that while they do indeed depict realistic aspects, they don't fully represent realism as a genre. Arguably, the only game that depicts both the realistic and realism is Ready or Not. So first off, yes, Ready or Not is indeed realistic. The player is not some hyper-acrobatic super soldier that can heal their wounds autonomously. In fact, it is quite the opposite, with one well-placed headshot being enough to terminate the mission. The game's combat emphasizes a slow but witty approach in order to reduce the risk of injuring oneself, teammates, or the unarmed, with a strict doctrine that can penalize the player for acting out of line. And lastly, the ability to command and coordinate a team of SWAT officers with a detailed menu on how to engage with each mission, down to the minute door. However, on the case of realism, Ready or Not asserts itself as a piece of this with its story, or the lack thereof, which acts more like a non-linear line of missions, and while they do have their own respective arcs, they act more like a vessel of situations that SWAT officers would face by putting the player in the boots of David Judge Beaumont, the leader of the LSPD SWAT's D Platoon. However, here's an important aspect to point out. He is just another SWAT officer, and other than that, he doesn't necessarily have a major character arc, nor does he gain recognition in the LSPD, nor does he save Los Sueños from some big bad. Another important aspect is that the missions are not just to depict realistic situations that SWAT officers would confront, but to also serve as a way to criticize modern-day Western society. To better phrase this statement is that each of the missions depicts a sort of failure from poverty, societal upheaval, and the failure of government, and the extent of this essay will approach and break down each major arc while also comparing them to their real-life counterparts. The first major issue to approach here is with the faction The Left Behind, a radicalized militia consisting of former US war veterans that have rallied together under the belief that the country that they fought for has forsaken them, hence The Left Behind. They first appeared in the missions Ides of March, followed by Sins of the Father. This group can serve as a representation of the neglect and treatment of war veterans post-conflict. The first time an issue like this was made apparent after the Vietnam War, due to its catastrophic failure, paired with the drastic social change of of times such as the rise of counterculture and with anti-war sentiment, countless soldiers found themselves displaced and disgruntled in society, depicted more as monsters instead of heroes. However, considering the time and place of Ready or Not's events, a more relevant example would be the war in Iraq. To give a quick history lesson, the war in Iraq came as a result of the 9/11 attacks, in which President George W. Bush declares war against the Iraqi government, hence starting Operation Iraqi Freedom, thrusting millions of US troops into the Middle East. And after the war, veterans came back with similar results to Vietnam, made worse when it was revealed that Bush lied about WMDs as an excuse to throw countless lives into turmoil, both American and Iraqi alike.
Mr. Bush, when are you going to apologize for the million Iraqis that are dead because you lied? You lied about weapons of mass destruction. You lied about connections to 9/11. You lied about Iraq being a threat. You sent me to Iraq. You sent me to Iraq in 2003. My friends are dead. Joshua Castile. You killed people. You lied. You lied about WMD. A million Iraqis are dead because you lied. My friends are dead because you lied! You need to apologize! Apologize!
To paraphrase a friend who is currently in the army and who will stay anonymous, soldiers from America typically came from rural and forested areas, being thrown to a new environment, that being the desert, only to return changed. The body may have returned to America, but their mind is still in Iraq. This highlights the importance of caring for these soldiers, as they essentially turn into husks of themselves, which further cements the amount of betrayal the left behind would feel when that part of them has been cut. On the other side of the front is the Hand. Featured in the missions Neon Tomb and Relapse, the Hand are a terrorist cell from northern Yemen that emerged after a US airstrike bombed a town, destroying the lives of many people, including children, as mentioned by some of the members after arresting them.
Do it now! Drop the weapon now!
No, you drop!
Hands on your head! Do it now!
Turn around slowly.
The police are here!
Out of the way, sir.
This was for what you have done to our homes!
Evidence secured.
Driven by revenge, they infiltrated America as a form of retaliation, headed by one Zahir Qamada Asadullah. Focusing on Neon Tomb, it was inspired by the Pulse nightclub shooting of 2016, a gay bar in Orlando, Florida, where a shooting occurred resulting in the deaths of 49 people, led by Omar Mateen in association with the extremist group ISIS. It is stated that this was payback for the death of Abu Wahib, a leader of ISIS who was killed in a US airstrike in Iraq the same year, which was also the result of US conflict in Iraq and Syria. The devs would then be met by backlash for publishing the mission on the on the shooting's anniversary, leading them to being separated from their publishing company, Team 17. Analytically, this is not to say which side is right or wrong, but to accentuate a cycle of violence throughout history where constant conflict led to global instability and relations. Historically, America's relationship with the Middle East is complicated at best, with countless interventions in wars like Lebanon, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. To further narrow this down is to note a couple of events. The first one being the Gulf War, where US troops protected oil fields in Kuwait against the forces of Iraq led by Saddam Hussein, and the other being the advent of the War on Terror, starting in 2001, and Operation Iraqi Freedom subsequently. Without elaborating too much, the constant conflict in the Middle East, exacerbated by US intervention, led to constant instability with foreign relations and a growing resentment against Arabs in America, which to this day continues to see no clear resolution. The issue of gun violence has been a prevalent issue in America for, let's say, the last 30 years. However, a more prevalent issue that still affects them today are school shootings, in which Ready or Not highlights with the mission Elephant. This mission isn't necessarily fixed on a specific event, but it can be referenced to the movie Elephant, which was based on the Columbine school shooting of April 20th, 1999. That day, two students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, entered Columbine High School, which resulted in the deaths of 13 students, a teacher, and later themselves. The intent behind the shooters is often debated. However, on a grander scale, it would only mark the beginning of a terrible trend that has plagued America since then. Retrospectively, the mission would also highlight America's rampant gun culture. Ratified in 1791, the Second Amendment has been a hot topic for decades, with no clear resolution on how guns should be handled. This highlights an issue that is often seen as an exclusively American problem, where the prominence of gun culture can be seen as a big contributor behind gun violence due to how easy they are to obtain. This is not to say that it's the direct contributor, but its enablement and sometimes glorification can let weapons fall into the wrong hands for how normal they are to have around. This can also highlight a long chain of denial, as the moment Columbine took place, people were quick to blame Doom or Marilyn Manson instead of addressing how the perpetrators managed to grab weapons or the state of their mental wellness, at least not immediately, instead of accepting the fact that gun culture can have a bigger contribution instead. With what is arguably the most disturbing mission in Ready or Not, the Valley of the Dolls has D Platoon raid the adult star Amos Vall's home after finding out he is the leader of a ring involving unfriendly activity against the youth. This mission served as the culmination of an inner circle of debauchery prevalent within people of influence. This problem of predatory behavior, let alone in places like Hollywood, has become a more and more prevalent issue over the past couple of decades, and especially last year, with many cases coming out of celebrities being exposed for unfriendly activity against the youth. Hollywood is not the only place for this type of behavior to sprout, as Ready or Not also highlights how internet celebrities are just as guilty, made apparent with the mission 23 megabytes a second, where D Platoon arrests the influencer Michael Milky Toes Williams after discovering that he was possessing photos, where in real life, more and more influencers are beginning to be shown as guilty of doing themselves. Separately, a different type of predatory behavior lies in plain sight under the form of human trafficking. According to statistics, it is discovered that this quiet pandemic is scarily more prominent than one would like to think, with it mostly occurring in urban areas, and with the majority of victims being women and the youth. Ready or Not highlights this with Hide and Seek, as D Platoon disrupts an auction on the dark web with women being transported in shipping crates while being abused physically and intimately.
Lisa, 20. English, Russian, certified pure. Open up. Clean. 10, 15, 20. 20. Last call. Sold for $23,000.
Overall, these two missions highlight the secretive nature of human exploitation and how easy it is to hide, but when they're discovered, opens a Pandora's box on the dark side of the powerful enterprises like Hollywood just sitting in the open. The history of gang violence is a long and hard to track epidemic that isn't exclusively an issue for the US, but focusing on the US can be described as a result of its long history of racism and classism. Not necessarily exclusive to any particular mission, Ready or Not has Los Locos del Pacíficos, aka the Crazies of the Pacific, a street gang rooted in Los Sueños, responsible for arms dealing, narcotics manufacturing and distributing, and smuggling, in which D Platoon often comes across. No doubt, Los Locos are objectively bad people, responsible for sowing destruction in their wake, and while not made explicit, it's important to note that Los Locos most likely formed in the same way most gangs assemble. Often, organized crime usually comes as a result of bigotry, ostracization, and poverty. According to the experiences of former members of LA's Bloods and Crips gangs, people join gangs for a sense of brotherhood and community after being marginalized for their race, only to resort to doing illegal activities such as robberies and dealing in narcotics. In the case of Los Locos, they can be compared to MS-13, aka Mara Salvatrucha 13, a gang that emerged from El Salvadorian immigrants that faced great ostracization, leading them to become a street gang. This also highlights a cycle of violence in American history, where the marginalized take up arms against what they see as an oppressor, forcing them to resort to crime, seeing it as the only way to survive. This is also contentious with the police, as street gangs often see them as their own gang, locking society as a whole in a constant war that, similar to gun violence, continues to see no resolution.
I fear the police because they're the biggest gang in America.
Point blank. I think you just spoke for all of us.
They basically got all right to knock us down with no justice after that.
Yeah.
And on the side of them cop cars, it says to protect and serve. Yeah. But they ain't doing none of that. They taking us. So it's like, of course I'm gonna fear you because you the one that's supposed to protect us. So I'm looking at you in the sense of, okay, you supposed to be safety, but no, you really coming at me with your gun out.
Right.
You feel me? But I'm looking at this man, I know how he coming. Right. It's not a facade, how you gonna come?
Since then, while times have definitely changed to allow more marginalized communities to be treated with more dignity, the scars of the past still permeate as a result of that oppression, with the police, or in this case Platoon and Judge, having to simply do their job for what the system perceives as the greater good. Now that multiple of these issues have been covered, it's time to dive into a question regarding the place of the police in society. Historically, the role and view of the police are hard to really dictate, as each opposing side can't necessarily agree on whether the police are the hand of an oppressive system, or the key to ensuring society stays safe, or to better yet, the relationship of morality and the law. Quoting one of my favorite movies, The Boondock Saints,
what should I do? Because I am a man who's supposed to uphold the law.
The laws of God are higher than the laws of man.
Yes, I was thinking that too. No, I was feeling it. All I needed was to hear you say it. Amen.
The context of the scene is about Officer Smecker and the conflict of his job as an FBI agent toiling with the actions of the McManus brothers as vigilante killers. And while this is in the context of a vigilante action movie, it brings up a good point on the separation of morality and the law. And ready or not, Judge does not have the freedom to exact justice under his own code of conduct, but to that of the ROE of the LSPD. To look at this issue is with the mission Ends of the Earth. Platoon was sent to arrest the sons of the Tran family, who were caught illegally manufacturing weapon parts for profit, only to discover that they do this to pay for their sick mother's medical bills. No matter the outcome, the family is ripped apart, with either the mother, Hui, seeing her sons Andy, Tom, and Vinny get arrested or killed, Hui dying because the Trans can't afford healthcare, or even if nothing was to happen, if the Trans didn't engage in weapons manufacturing, their mom would die, but if they were to continue in their illegal business, they can pay for the bills but at the cost of indirectly hurting others. This highlights really that the police act more as a middleman, in which Judge does not have the freedom to change, hence the introduction of the statement of morality being objective yet unobjective, where Judge acts as the hand and gavel of justice. However, it raises the question on justice and its presence in the law. Now, Judge as a character is not the most in-depth protagonist ever, by serving instead as a stand-in for the player, but briefly, it was made apparent that even he can discern the morality of man and the law. In Hide and Seek, Judge can optionally open a shipping crate that is discovered to be housing women being trafficked. However, he gets into a squabble with FISA Command, the game's equivalent of the FBI, as he is commanded to shut the doors, only for Faiza to come in later. However, he is at odds with them as he feels they need to be rescued immediately.
Talk. We have a container full of women. We need Thames down here right now.
Copy that. Entry team. EFTs and trailers are...
This is FISA. Stand down and shut that door, entry team. We're sending a unit to secure the container and its contents.
What? We're not leaving them like this.
Close the doors. Unless you want to interfere with a federal investigation, I suggest you shut the door and lock it behind you. Do your job and proceed with your mission. Understood?
Understood. Put the other guy back on. We'll talk later.
No, we won't be. FISA out.
Now, there isn't much to really say, as there can only be so much to pick apart from some lines of dialogue. However, it goes to show that Judge is a conscious person, to some extent, capable of questioning his position and job with the command of those of higher authority. Overall, the police serve as a middleman for the law, and the people are required to follow a doctrine of a greater good. Throughout Ready or Not, it is shown that these situations, should they be upheld to a T, are indeed for a greater good. But it is important to note that all of these issues throughout this essay are problems that come from within American society, throwing the police into this vicious cycle, acting almost like damage control, while Los Sueños tears itself apart. This idea can even be extended in the DLC missions like Dorms, where Platoon shuts down a refugee camp after a hurricane, or Leviathan, where eco-terrorists take over an oil rig, highlighting issues such as the inaction of the powerful to help the more impoverished. This is not necessarily to deem that the police are mindless robots obeying the powerful, nor is it to justify the actions of the lower class, when really, they're just part of the cycle of the government's failure to serve the people in the first place. In conclusion, Ready or Not is a bleak game. It showcases how depraved humanity really is capable of, from the powerful neutering the downtrodden, the actions of war affecting the people at home indirectly, or simply how the everyman is caught in the crossfire of a society whose government left them to the wolves. Unlike Tarkov, Insurgency, or Hell Let Loose, Ready or Not does more than be realistic by addressing these issues, by putting them into a vessel in the form of Los Sueños. As mentioned in the beginning, Los Sueños is a parody of Los Angeles, where stars are born, but at the same time, it too has its major set of problems, such as poverty, the backstage depravity of Hollywood, and the prominence of street gangs, making it an epicenter to what eventually created Ready or Not, reflecting it back to the world as a testament to the evil of mankind, for as mentioned in the beginning, art imitates life, and as Saturn eats his sun, so too does Los Sueños eat the lives of what could have been the land of dreams. So, that includes my essay on Ready or Not. As said before, this was a rather heavy game to cover due to its serious matters, but ultimately my goal for this essay is to showcase not only how games are capable of depth, even when it doesn't come across as that, and I felt that Ready or Not shines in this case, but also to, let's say, altruistically highlight how games are capable as well of addressing serious issues, despite them just being games, in which, again, I feel Ready or Not shines as an example of that. Now, normally, I want to choose my next essay to cover, but because this is my third one, I want to let y'all, the audience, choose. So, for my next essay, I want to let y'all either choose the Metro Trilogy, and how it counts as a piece of the epic genre, and how Artyom can be seen as a biblical character, or Mouthwashing as a piece of the tragedy genre, and how the actions of Curly and Jimmy led to the ultimate demise of the Tulpar. I'll let y'all know which one will be chosen on my IG, and whichever gains the biggest vote, I will cover first, and the latter will be covered right afterwards. I have so much to talk about, so I'm really excited to getting to covering these masterpieces. But for now, I've talked enough, so I say to y'all, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between, and everyone in New Orleans, my name is Cobra. And y'all have yourselves a beautiful night.